So welcome everyone to this webinar called Soul Retrieval with Chris Waters. My name's Steve Nobel. Now this webinar is about soul loss and soul retrieval, which is a very shamanic principle. According to shamanic wisdom, soul loss can happen when a part of a person's essence leaves in order to survive a difficult or traumatic experience. Now, shamans have a very different understanding of soul than perhaps we're used to in the West, and we're going to be talking about that with Chris. Now, Chris Waters is a good friend of mine. She's a shamanic practitioner and senior teacher of the Healing of the Light Body School in Europe, as trained by Alberto Villoldo of the energy medicine of the Inca tradition. Now, I know Chris has had many years' experience in running groups and courses. She used to run Lifetimes in Reading, which was a great, used to run these sort of great exhibitions. I'm not sure, was it twice a year, Chris, that used to run?
Yeah, twice a year, yeah.
Twice a year, great. I went down a few times. I actually met some really lifelong friends at your show. I met two people who came on our team and were very influential on our team. One is now living in New Zealand, which is Samantha. I don't know if you remember Samantha.
Samantha Thurby Brits, yeah, I remember
Yeah,
Samantha.
and the other one is Gabriella, who's now living in...
Gabriella.
Yeah.
Aha, yeah, nice.
Both at your show. Well, I have lots of questions, Chris, on this subject, because I love shamanism. I love the whole concept of soul retrieval. It's been very important to me in my sanity and health, as it were. Now, my first question to you is, shamanism, it's a very ancient path, probably going back 30 or 40,000 years. How powerful is it in a modern context? How accepted, useful is it in our modern world?
In our modern world today, it feels to me as if it's probably more important than it's ever been before, because we live in a society that I think we've fallen asleep, Steve.
Yeah.
I was seeing today, I'm going to put it into today's context. I was seeing today on the front of a newspaper that, there's a lot of fear around so many things. We now have swine fever, which has turned into pig flu, and lots of fear around financial, economic, and political crises that are happening all over the world. And for me, we have actually fallen asleep. And so, for me, falling asleep is where we experience soul loss, where we're looking at the world and saying, actually, it's okay to give our authority away to the powers that be because they know best. And in fact, this is a great image of soul loss, that actually somebody else knows better than you do how to run your life. And fear is a big thing in the world today. So many people live in fear now of getting swine fever. Last year it was bird flu. The time before that it was SARS. And we're always developing these things that we can be scared of and that we could die from. But actually, we die from those things every day of the year. Millions of people die from disease and pneumonia and hunger and flu and all kinds of things, but right now we've fallen asleep and allowed all these things to happen in the world that it's crazy. And so the loss of our essence, who we actually truly are, is allowing us to give away our power. And I think we're in a place in the world now where people are beginning to want to take that back, to say it's not okay to have somebody tell me how I have to be in the world, or when you go to the doctor says, take these tablets, they'll make you better, and then we discover that most of the time they're placebos anyway. So I'm very much with where we are in the world right now is wanting to reclaim our essential selves, wanting to reclaim a part of ourselves that has been lost, a cultural soul loss, if you like, and that's probably a reflection of personal soul loss and global soul loss. For the indigenous peoples, they don't see it as soul loss, by the way. They see it as a part of our life force that goes down into the underworld as a result of trauma and is held there safe until the time is right for it to come back. And I'm going to stick with the global thing, Steve, just for a moment and say that we have these myths that we all have lived by, and myths are maps for humanity to follow. We have the myth of the Sleeping Beauty, that she who falls asleep for 1,000 years waiting for the prince to come down in the underworld, surrounded by trees, and the prince has to hack his way through to find his princess. And we have the myth of King Arthur, who is laid asleep until the time is ready for him to return. And I believe that time is now. That time is now, that these aspects that have been laid asleep for so long are actually, it's time to wake up. And I think that's my role as a shaman in the world, to stay awake to what's happening in me, in the world, but not to be hooked into what's happening, but to notice it and be able to point out that the emperor has no clothes on. Does that make sense, Steve?
It does. Well, one of the things you mentioned, which made me think, was that a lot of things you talked about, which was about like the sort of swine flu and all this kind of thing. Do you think there's a great fear of nature and our own bodies and the natural world? Because shamanism is, if anything, to me, about the world is a sort of safe place and there are powers wanting to help us. It seems that the modern world is the other way around. Yeah.
Absolutely. We have been taught in the West that nature itself is to be feared, to be controlled, to be managed, to be overcome. And actually, for the indigenous peoples, we work with nature, and nature is absolutely benign. That it's abundant. I can look out of my window now and see an incredible, abundant world. The leaves on the trees are big and lush and green, and the grass is lush, and there's enough for what I'm seeing here. There's abundance, and yet we have been told that there's not enough. We believe in our minds that we have to fight for everything, that we have to control nature, that we have to. I know when I was in Peru, one of the shamans pointed out to me that there were eucalyptus trees everywhere. The eucalyptus has been brought in from other countries into Peru as a tree that they should have. What a great tree. It grows in really austere conditions, da-da-da. What those eucalyptus trees did was to make the soil arid and to take the fertility out of the soil so nothing can grow there now. And so we as human beings think we can control it, we can make it happen. Our will is what works on the world. And yet nature, for the indigenous peoples, they work with it. We have our allies in each of the worlds. The allies, for our shaman, for example, they talk to the trees. And the trees talk back. And the creatures of the earth speak to us and bring us messages of hope and joy. But for us in the West, it's something to be overcome. And actually it is the great feminine. And if you think about what's happened to the feminine in our society in the West, it's been truly suppressed over time. And that itself has been pushed down into the underworld, into the domains of the soul, to be held safe until that time is right for it to come back. Because we've had really, consciousness itself has had to walk this path of